Sewol ferry disaster could be regarded as one of South Korea's worst days in its modern history, becoming the second worst ferry disaster since the sinking of the Namyang in December of 1970. What was supposed to be a field trip to Jeju Island turned into a disaster that was responsible for over 300 lives lost. And to this day, there are many questions that have still gone unanswered. How did the Sewol manage to clear port after being loaded with 3 times its weight limit? Why did rescue efforts take so long when the boat was capsizing? Why did the Korean Navy turn down support from the US and Japanese navies? Where was President Park during the first 7 hours of the incident? And what happened to Chung Hae-jin's former chairman, Yoo Byung-eun, after being named the most wanted man in South Korea? This event sparked a snowball effect that eventually led to Prime Minister Chung Hong-won to resign and help start the impeachment of Korea's President Park Geun-hye. During the Sewol ferry incident, 304 lives were lost. 250 of those were young high school students from Danwon High School in Ansan, Gyeonggi-do. And to this day, 5 bodies have yet to be found. Now in South Korea, school is life. You study for the college entrance exam for most of your teenage years, so most students experience very little free time. At the request of Vice Principal Kang Min-gyu, a junior class trip to Jeju Island was planned for the 325 students and over a dozen teachers. They would board the Sewol on the afternoon of April 15th, and after a delay, they were on their way to Jeju Island. On the morning of April 16th from 7:30 to 8:45 a.m., the Sewol entered the Mengol Channel, one of the strongest areas of Korean waters that has a very strong and unpredictable current, ranked second only to the Myeongnyang Strait. At this time, students were having breakfast in the cafeteria, just as the third mate, Park Han-kyol, ordered the helmsman, Cho Jung-gi, to turn the ship towards the right, from 135 degrees to 140, then again from 140 to 145 degrees. That doesn't seem bad, does it? 10 degrees in a couple of minutes? But there are 4 things I would like to point out that make this a very dangerous move. The Sewol was carrying 3,608 tons of cargo, more than 3 times the limit of 987 tons. It is estimated that the actual cargo on the day of the accident weighed 2,215 tons, including 920 tons of trucks, cars, and heavy equipment, 131 tons of containers, and 1,164 tons of general goods. The ship also added modifications to carry more people after Chung Hae-jin, the company that owned the ship, had purchased it. The ballasts were also filled with only 580 tons of water to balance the ship, 75% less than the required 2,030 tons. Why? Well, the ship's crew pumped out most of the water to add more cargo to the ship, causing the center of gravity to become too high for safe operation. Now, during all of this panic, Cho Jung-gi had tried to stop the ship from turning. However, they had turned the wheel back to the left to cancel the ship's change of direction, but the ship had kept turning. The ship ultimately would turn 45 degrees, then would rotate another 22 degrees in place within 20 seconds. At 8:50 a.m., the ship was leaning 30 degrees to port, and the ship's captain, Lee Jung-suk, had ordered the ship's crew to the bridge. At 8:52 a.m., the first emergency call was made by one of the students, Chae Duk-ha. As he dialed 119 and notified Cheollanam-do fire station that the Sewol was capsizing, he was then forwarded to the Mokpo Coast Guard, gave a latitude and longitude location of the ship, and the KCG launched Patrol Vessel 123 at 8:58 a.m. Chae Duk-ha would be found later by a dive team. However, his emergency call helped save many lives that day, and he is still revered as a hero. At 9:06 a.m., Jindo VTS was notified by Mokpo Coast Guard that the Sewol was sinking. Jindo VTS didn't even know the Sewol was nearby, but they started talking with other ships in the area, one confirming it had visual contact with the Sewol. 1 minute later, the crew had completely confirmed that the ship was sinking and started asking for assistance from the Coast Guard. Between 9:14 and 9:20 a.m., the ship was listing at about 50 degrees, to which the crew said evacuation was now impossible. At 9:23 a.m., Jindo VTS told the crew to inform the passengers to wear life jackets. The Sewol crew had made the excuse that the announcement equipment was having issues. so the Jindo VTS ordered the crew to personally go down and order them to wear life jackets and to put on warm clothes. And then came 9:25. Captain Lee Jun-suk had made the decision to evacuate the ship. The VTS and Jindo couldn't make the decision due to lack of information of the ship's status. Lee Jun-suk then asked about rescue teams and was notified that patrol boats and one helicopter were on the way. Lee Jun-suk would again ask the passengers to stay where they are, and the ship's intercom would echo this order over and over again, as the ship was currently sinking. At 9:33 a.m., Jindo VTS told all ships in the area to drop lifeboats and render assistance to the sinking ship, and within minutes, communications between Sewol and Jindo VTS would go silent. Shortly thereafter, about 160 passengers, including crew members, jumped overboard. Lee Jun-suk would make calls to Chung Hae-jin, and most of his crew would abandon the ship at around 9:46 a.m., leaving the rest of the trapped passengers with no guidance, only each other. Most of the students trapped on board would make videos, call and text their families, and send their final messages to their friends on the ship. The last text message recorded was sent at around 10:17 a.m. As mentioned earlier, the Korean Coast Guard sent Patrol Vessel 123 to the site around 8:58 a.m., and within minutes, the government had created the Central Disaster Countermeasure Headquarters, and this group would report directly to the Blue House, Korea's version of the American White House. After being dispatched, Patrol Vessel 123 arrived on scene at about 9:30 a.m., with two other patrol boats on the way. 123 had failed to reach the Sewol, but had contacted other ships in the area. Here are some of the initial calls made between the Korean Coast Guard on site and the government.
진도에서 여기까지 전환 신고 들었습니까?
예, 지금 저희 현황 파악 중입니다, 지금.
세월호 500명 탔고요.
아니, 480명 정도 되네요.
480명?
예. 지금까지 파악된 거로는요. 승객 450에 승선은 24명요.
심각한 상태는 아닌가요?
아니요, 배가 지금 진도에 기울었다고 하니까 일단 현장 가봐야 할 것 같네요. 예.
Between 9:30 and 11:28 a.m., Korea would set up their response teams to include medical support, accident response, and ship salvage units, or SSUs. During this time at 11 a.m., MBC, one of Korea's top TV networks, would report that all the students had been rescued. At least 368 people were rescued according to media reports. However, the government would then retract this statement and say that 295 passengers remained missing. And to make matters worse, 22 of the 29 crew members of the Sewol survived, including 15 members responsible for the ship's navigation. The last crew member wouldn't be found until July 22, 2014, 3 months after the ferry sank. At 2:42 p.m., 150 members of the Korean Army Special Warfare Command would be dispatched to the site to include 40 divers. However, underwater dives would not begin until 5 p.m., and at 8 p.m. that evening, investigations into the ship's hull all of a sudden were ceased. Now, I mentioned the U.S. Navy being sent to assist in this operation. The USS Bonham Richard was in the area during the sinking. However, the Iraq Navy turned away its U.S. Navy helicopters so they could only observe from a distance. The Japanese Coast Guard also wanted to help, but the Coast Guard declined, stating that the special assistance was not necessary. On 17 April, a private company called Undin began to lead the dive search for missing passengers, and by mid-morning, the total number of divers from military, private, and civilian sectors reached 555. Sadly enough, around 2:30 that same afternoon, diving operations stopped due to bad weather. The next day, on 18 April, the Korean Coast Guard started to pump air into the ship in order to create bigger air pockets, and divers were only able to access the cargo deck of the ship. Throughout the following searches over the next couple of months, 2 rescue divers would pass away due to injuries sustained during diving operations, and 5 emergency workers had died in a helicopter crash in support of the aid mission. By April 22, 2015, plans were approved to salvage the wreckage in order to help find the remaining 9 passengers that were unaccounted for. After the wreck was eventually raised on March 2017, 4 of the missing passengers were found. Even though most of the missing had been found, there are several instances that I'd like to highlight. Remember Kang Min-kyu, the vice principal that arranged the field trip? He had survived the morning of the incident, but was so overcome with survivor's guilt and grief that several days after the incident, he was found hanging outside of the Jindo Gymnasium, a place where the families of the victims had come to await their missing loved ones. When police searched his body, they found a note that read, "Surviving alone is too painful when 200 lives are unaccounted for. I take full responsibility." The note ended with a request that his body be cremated and the ashes scattered over the site of the accident, that I might be a teacher in heaven to those kids whose bodies have not been found. On 27 April, Prime Minister Jung Hong-won accepted responsibility for the disaster and announced his resignation. 2 days later, President Park indirectly apologized for the government's response to the sinking. On 18 May, the BBC reported that Park Geun-hye announced plans to break up the Korean Coast Guard after it had failed to respond well during the disaster. Since 2017, the Korean Coast Guard has now become a part of the Korean police force. On 15 May, Captain Lee Jun-seok managed to receive 36 years in prison. However, after appeals from the prosecution, his sentence was increased to life imprisonment, even after prosecutors in pretty much all of Korea wanted him dead. Several members of his crew were also indicted on charges of homicide through gross negligence, many receiving sentences up to 14 years. However, many of the families disagree with the sentencing. And what about the Chung Hae-jin owner? Remember him? Yoo Byung-un, also known as the millionaire with no face, was issued an arrest warrant by the Incheon District Court on 22 May, with a reward of 50 million won offered for any information leading to his arrest. That reward was raised 3 days later to 500 million won. However, he was found less than a month later on 12 June 2014, dead in a location 415 kilometers south of Seoul in a field. He was wearing a leather jacket, had several bottles of alcohol around him, and when the police found him, they mistook him for a homeless man. However, autopsy results determined that it was him, but there was no foul play or any evidence of alcohol or drugs in his tests. The cause of death ruled inconclusive due to his body being too decomposed. Now what about President Park? A couple years after the investigation, a report from the National Intelligence Service was released to the public, in which President Park Geun-hye referred to the Sewol disaster as just a ferry accident, and we must control the protests in the name of the ferry incident. The report didn't mention anything helpful concerning the sinking or the families involved, but exposed Park's paranoia about protests that were run by opposing political parties. But wait, there's more. Park also created a commission that monitored her critics' actions. Tatsuya Kato, a Japanese journalist, was arrested and charged with defamation after reporting that Park had corruption ties with Chae Sun-shu. However, this piqued the interest of the Korean media, and a full exposure of this rumor turned out to be true, leading to her approval ratings of around 70% at the time to plummet to over 40% in a matter of weeks. Now, after her corruption scandal came to light, the Korean Constitutional Court voted unanimously to impeach President Park, and she was sentenced to 25 years in prison. However, after an appeal, it was only shortened to 20 years, but then the new president at the time, Moon Jae-in, pardoned her completely. Even though he had found out that Park had made a secret blacklist of artists that supported the Sewol victims on their work, well, they determined the blacklistings were illegal. Those responsible under Park's administration were sentenced to 3 years in prison. To answer the question on her whereabouts on the day of the sinking, you know what she was doing? She was in her bedroom, had a meeting with Chae Sun-shu, and got her hair done in the 8 hours before emergency meetings at 5 p.m., the day that the Sewol had sunk. Now, in conclusion, the Sewol ferry disaster is still remembered and observed every year around South Korea, with many Koreans commemorating the event with yellow ribbons. It is an annual reminder of a time where the people that Koreans trusted the most had failed them in the worst way possible. After a court ruling in 2018, the government was ordered to pay the families of each victim 200 million won and 40 million won to every parent that lost a child in the incident. In a separate lawsuit, the now defunct Chung Hae-jin company was ordered to pay another 20 families 80 million won. But still to this day, families continue to suffer. And in doing so much research for this video, I pledge to donate $50 for every 100 likes on this video to the 416 Foundation. I know it isn't much, but this video was very difficult to put together after all the emotion, research, and editing of this video. I do hope that in the end, after all the negativity and sadness, that you still enjoyed what you saw. So, until next time, take it easy. 행복하세요.